Okay, guys, so we are going to be speaking about resilience today, how to understand resilience, how to build resilience. And hopefully, as we go through this webinar, you'll have a bit of an idea for the what the concept means, but also how to gain a bit of skills for developing resilience in yourself. This is the type of thing that I think a lot of us are looking for in life, right? We kind of prize this idea of resilience. And because it seems like it's the type of thing that we would need to get through life. Because I think we recognize that life can be difficult at times. It can be characterized by hardship or suffering, or things not necessarily going our way. And I think this idea of having some type of ability to withstand the challenges of life is something that is I think important to a lot of people, but it's not always necessarily obvious how to get there. So again, sorry, I know there's some drilling downstairs. It means I'm having to talk just a little bit louder. So I'm a bit distracted by it myself, but I hope that it's not interfering with the audio. If you're struggling to hear me, let me know. I have to be resilient with this to be able to kind of continue with this. Sounds like a drill going off inside my head. Okay, good. So yeah, my name is James Sturdee. I think most of you are joining for the first time. So this is an introduction. It's a meeting. We haven't met before. I am a registered psychological counselor at the Health Professions Council. I've been registered since 2010. So this is my 15th year of practice. I have been at Regent for almost 10 years, about 9 years now. I think since 2016 I was at Regent. Started at Regent in the counseling services. That's where I am now. And I do a lot of the student counseling, a lot of the staff counseling, and I do a lot of webinars and trainings as well. I'm also in private practice in Morningside in Durban. Yeah, I've been in private practice for about 9 years as well. And yeah, the type of things I work with are everyday challenges that people have, trying to make sense of their lives and trying to make sense of challenges that they're going through. That's the normal type of thing I work with. I normally work with people who are kind of, functioning okay. They're not necessarily very unwell, but they are just trying to kind of get through some difficulties in their lives, or maybe trying to develop some skills or get through a difficult patch. So I work with things like grief, and I work with stress, and I work with trauma, and I work with couples a lot. I work a lot with helping people with emotional regulation. So those are the kind of general things that I'm interested in, how to kind of get through that. And as you'll probably link it to today's session, a lot of the time these challenges are they require resilience, psychological resilience to get through. So let's get a bit into that and try understand a bit more about this topic together. And there will be a bit of time for questions at the end. We have until 2 o'clock now. So yeah, I'll leave a bit of time at the end for questions, but also please feel free to chat as we go. I'll kind of keep half an eye on the chat. There's not a lot of us, so it's not too hard for me to do that. It doesn't distract me. I just check in from time to time to see what you guys are kind of feeding back. And if you have any questions, put them in the chat, and I'll also, if I don't get to them, I'll get to them at the end as well. Okay, so once again, welcome everybody. Great to have you all with us. So it's helpful when we are talking about resilience to think about this idea of strength, because often this is what we think about when we think about resilience, right? When we think about getting through difficult times, we have this idea of, well, you need to be strong. And this is advice that's often given to people, especially people that are grieving. You need to be strong right now. If you're going through a difficult time, going through a divorce, or you're going through difficult periods of exams, the advice often that people give us, or that we give people, is to be strong. But it's not always clear what we mean by that, right? What does it actually mean to be strong? What does it mean to be weak? And I think we have a lot of preconceptions about these ideas, and some of them can be unhelpful, right? So what do you think about when you think about strength or a strong person? What does that look like? Is that someone who never shows that they're struggling? Is it someone who kind of has the mask on a lot of the time? Uh, is it someone who is open about when they go through a difficult time? How do we think about these things? How do we think about weakness, right? What is weakness when we're unable to cope? Weakness when we're overwhelmed? Weakness when we're not okay? Because I think we have this aversion against weakness. We obviously and often don't want to be weak. We want to kind of be able to deal with the things that life is throwing. And so we have these ideas, and we want to kind of move towards strength and move away from weakness. And often that means we find ourselves in places where we can't always be honest with ourselves or other people about what we're going through. So yeah, but not only, that's a good description. Your idea of someone who's has strength, it's someone who's able to endure tough times. They don't shy away from tough times. To endure tough times. What does that look like? Is it someone who goes through tough times and doesn't necessarily tell people how they're doing? Is it someone who suffers alone and then comes out the other side, and then you hear that they've been going through a really difficult 6 months, but they didn't share it with you at the time? You see, there's a lot of different ways of thinking about these ideas. So when we're thinking about strength, a lot of the default definitions that we have, and a lot of the conceptions of strength that are often shared with me have to do with rigidity. Right? So this kind of strength can be something that doesn't move very much. This is the idea of rigidity. So that can mean rigid beliefs or rigid expectations from other people, life rules or permissions that we set for ourselves. They're kind of set in stone. And by permissions or rules, it means what do we allow ourselves to do? How do we allow ourselves to feel? How do we allow ourselves to express the emotions when we're going through difficult times? Do we have a very kind of set idea of what's okay and what's not okay? So if you think about a stone, right? A stone is kind of strong because it's immovable. If you look at the picture on that on the screen there, you know, that's you would kind of imagine that boulder that Sisyphus there is rolling up the hill is strong, right? And it's strong because it's rigid. If you hit it, it's not going to break easily. And that's often how we think about psychological strength. We have this kind of rigidity to it. But the problem with rigidity is that when it goes through extreme stress, it tends to break. And not only does it break, but it can break quite dramatically. It can shatter. Um, this is what I think of as the scatter cushion effect. So the scatter cushion effect is if you kind of compare two things, right? Maybe you can compare the desk. I've got the desk in front of me right now. It's very solid. It's very hard. You would think that it's quite a strong uh, piece of equipment. And you compare it to maybe a scatter cushion. So I'm a half behind me. You probably can't see it, but there's a couple of cushions back there. They're strong. They're kind of flexible. And you'd probably say, well, which of these is stronger? Well, the desk surely is stronger. You would, well, if you're going to be hit with any of them, you'd rather be hit with the cushion than the desk. But if you take this, both of these items and you throw them off the balcony, I'm on the third floor here, so it's a bit of a drop down to the street below, and you throw them both out. What you're going to find is that the desk completely shatters under the stress of falling and landing on the street, and the scatter cushion kind of floats down and on the lands on the street, and it's typically fine, right? Not if it does, but it's okay. So what this can do, I think sometimes it can challenge our idea of what it actually means to be strong, and maybe strength doesn't necessarily have to be characterized by rigidity, and specifically psychological rigidity, right? Which is the inability or the unwillingness to kind of change as the situation changes, to change our mind on things, to change what we allow ourselves to do, to change how we are allowed to feel, how we cope with things. The more flexibility we have there, often that can then lead into being more resilient. It's often the people who have very strict rules for themselves that they can get through life in terms of the day-to-day stress. They can cope with it. They're the type of people who look very capable and competent, and they look resilient. They have very rigid rules for themselves. You look at them, you think that's a strong person, right? They're able to cope with everything that happens. But also what we find is those people, when the stress starts to become too significant, they start to face the really big challenges in life. Often they're unable to really, and that's when their mental health can really pay a price. With trauma counseling with, for example, cash and transit um, drivers and cash and transit guards, so people who are transporting cash. And obviously, you know, in South Africa, we have that's like a war zone for those guys. They're often under a lot of pressure, and when they do get robbed, it's a very severe robbing. It's not just, you know, someone pointing a gun. It's often 15 people, all with extremely powerful automatic weapons and explosives, and it's very much like a war zone. So these people are incredibly courageous. They wake up every day early in the morning. They get out there in their vans and they kind of face these troubles with a lot of strength and courage. But what I've found is when they go through a significant trauma, and these are significant traumas, it's typically the people who are able to have more flexibility in how they cope with things, that are able to actually cope, and they don't develop, they find it hard, but they don't develop symptoms of post-traumatic stress. It's the people who are very kind of rigid to say, well, you know, when I'm hurting, I'm not really going to tell anybody how I feel, because that's worked for me for the last 40 years. And that rigidity then often leads to them not really processing the trauma, not making sense of it, not experiencing the full emotional range that they're understandably feeling, and they tend to then develop symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. And you can see there how psychological rigidity actually leads to poor psychological health eventually, although it might be able to get us through a lot of stuff up until then. So this is more a concept of anti-fragility than the concept of strength, right? This is something slightly different. To think, well, maybe we don't have to focus so much on what it means to be strong, which is you wearing the armor and you got mask on, and, you know, life bounces off you, or the bullets and the arrows bounce off you. Maybe it's more about being anti-fragile, which is we kind of take the punches and we're able to kind of survive them, as opposed to being unblemished by them. Because the one thing about life is that it causes blemishes, right? We don't get through it unscathed. Just the experience of growing up and surviving our childhoods, there's so many bruising and wounding experiences that happen in that time. And so we can either kind of come out and we can be fragile, which is strong on the outside, and then maybe quite vulnerable to severe changes in our environment internally, or we can be anti-fragile, which is to be maybe not necessarily this kind of portrayal of just uncompromising strength and rigidity, but maybe someone who's able to kind of, you know, take on, be a little bit more vulnerable, be a little bit more expressive, be a bit more connected with ourselves when we're going through difficult times. And maybe allowing ourselves to take care of ourselves when we're going through difficult times, as opposed to pretending that we're kind of, you know, fine and untouched and not affected. So yeah, resilience, and this, I think, Samir, I think I saw your comment briefly, one who can bounce back. That's a great description as well. So your description of strength is someone who can bounce back when facing sufferings. This is a great concept as well that you're introducing there, and that we're kind of coming to now. This idea of bounce back ability. So when we go through a setback, it affects us, right? And maybe it changes us, and maybe we are knocked off our feet for days or weeks or months. But over time, we kind of respond, and we kind of restore ourselves back to where we were before, to not only just adapt, but also to thrive in the face of adversity. This is bounce back ability. And things, again, that are too strong and too rigid tend not to bounce back. They tend to shatter. And then you can see this in the built environment, our built world, right? So the strongest structures are made to absorb changes in the environment. So bridges sway and move all the time. A bridge that was completely rigid would break over time. Same with very tall buildings. Tall buildings are designed to kind of, you know, move in the wind, and in places like Japan, they're even designed to kind of withstand quite significant movements in the earth from earthquakes. That makes them more resilient and able to bounce back than things that are just too kind of set and unable to change when the environment demands it. So yeah, this is the scarification advantage. Sometimes being a bit more vulnerable and a little bit more open allows us then to withstand adversity or recover from adversity. This kind of facilitates a certain mental toughness, which is not immunity. There's a difference between mental toughness and immunity. So often the idea of strength is that we're immune from pain, we're immune from really, you know, um, struggling in the way other people struggle. Whereas mental toughness means we struggle, but we're able to still show up. We're able to still show up for ourselves. We're able to still hold on to some idea of hope, and that then can nurture feedback into resilience. And hope is a very big component of resilience as well. This concept that the future will be different. I don't know what the future is going to be like, but what I'm struggling with right now, this too shall pass. This is not necessary forever. And it's depression tends to happen when we lose hope. And more desperate types of states of mind, suicidal ideations happen when we start to lose hope, because we human beings are capable of getting through amazingly challenging situations if they have the sense that this is not forever, this is just for now. And that hope really builds resilience. Is when that hope starts to fade and we start to think, oh, the way that I'm feeling right now, the way that I'm struggling right now, this is just indefinite. That tends to be when we start to be overwhelmed. So hope and resilience do go hand in hand as well. And sometimes we have to cultivate hope. Sometimes the hope doesn't land on us. It doesn't just visit us. We have to actually find it within ourselves to kind of remind ourselves and find perspective on what we're dealing with, and kind of cultivate that hope and nurture it, build it up to the point where we can feel, okay, well, there is something on the other side of this. It's not always going to be like the way it is right now. And then resilience allows us to have some protection or resistance from the negative effects of chronic stress. Particularly chronic stress is when we're under stressful environments for prolonged periods of time, and then that starts to kind of, we don't ever exit the fight or flight survival mode. We're constantly in a state of alertness because our brains are thinking we're in some type of danger. We're constantly on the lookout, and that can lead to exhaustion. We never get into the recovery phase of, I've been through a stressful time and now I'm recovering again. Chronic stress means we're kind of going through it continuously, and then exhaustion can start to happen. And that can undermine resilience, and resilience in turn can protect us from the full effects of that chronic stress. So bounce back ability is a wonderful concept, and one that's really helpful to model. But resilience is more than just bounce back ability. So it is bounce back ability. It is about saying, okay, life right now is punching me in the face, and actually I'm on my back on the mat, and I'm going to slowly get to my feet again, and then maybe lick my wounds a bit, go into the corner, make sure that I'm okay, and then kind of go out there and face the challenges again. That's bounce back ability. But resilience is more than just that. Resilience is also, okay, so bounce back ability is great, but you can take it to another level, which is that of post-traumatic growth. So you can see in that picture there, the green shoots of recovery. This is a really good thing for ecosystems, is natural burns, fires. They kind of come along and they burn everything, and they burn out the vegetation and the dead vegetation. And then the seeds are often below the ground, the roots are below the ground, they are protected from the fires, and then they start to come back again. And you can see that this is the idea of green shoots of recovery. And that's so good for the ecosystem, because when things start to grow back, they grow back into a more balanced and healthy ecosystem. And without natural fires, the ecosystem doesn't often thrive in the way that nature has kind of evolved to thrive in over time. And then you get certain types of species that are taking over, certain types of plants, trees that then are too widespread. You get a lot of dead vegetation on the floor, so that kind of interrupts ecosystems as well. And then eventually when the fire does come, it's really, really significant because there's so much matter and fuel that it's burning up. But then type of natural burning is very good for natural regrowth. And post-traumatic growth is a kind of analogous type of dynamic, which is sometimes the crises in our lives and the adversity that we experience can feel like it's catastrophic, but the way we grow back from it often is profoundly transformative, and we come out the other side of it in ways that transcend the way we were before. And we can't really see that when we're going through the difficulties, when we're really struggling. It just feels like pain and adversity and hardship. It's overwhelming. But when we have the perspective of a bit of time and we start to notice the changes that have come over ourselves, we can often look at that really difficult period and say, well, that actually was really formative in making me the person that I am today. And this is the concept of post-traumatic growth. So resilience doesn't mean just returning to the way that we were before, in the same way that a scatter cushion might when it drops out of a window and lands on the street. Resilience is about actually growing past where we were when we went into the traumatic or the difficult situation. So the goal is not to remain unchanged, but to actually see the opportunities for growth. And this is of active we're kind of experiencing because we haven't chosen them, and life is kind of inflicting them upon us. So maybe you're dealing with a very difficult family member. You didn't choose that family member. You didn't choose them to be disappointing you the way that they are. That now you've got to kind of deal with that, and that's just it's hard and it's flawed, painful, disappointing. That's a passive challenge that you're experiencing. Whereas an active challenge is something that you go towards, right? You say, I want this thing in my life, this hard thing, because I want what's on the other side of it. And for those of you who are writing exams right now, that for those of you who are about to, start studying in 2026, that's an active challenge that you're taking on there. So when you're going through the difficulty of it, it's hard, and you're kind of trying to, get through exams, which was just a painful period of stress and deprivation. That's an active challenge, and it feels different. It feels different to experience active challenges. Often what we can do is we can almost transform passive challenges into active challenges. We can say, okay, well, I didn't actually choose to be in this environment, but I can see an opportunity here for me. I can see an opportunity to kind of to grow through this. I can see an opportunity to develop a certain part of my what makes me a full, complete human being in this. I can see like maybe this allows me to be better at dealing with people who push my buttons. Maybe this is an opportunity to learn how to kind of control my anger when I get angry a bit. So we can see the opportunities that are there in growth, and we don't just see necessarily the hardship as something that's being inflicted upon us. And this is the power that we have to frame the situation, any situation that we're in. We have a huge amount of scope there in terms of kind of determining that narrative. And the narrative is just the stories that we're constantly telling ourselves about our situation and where we find ourselves right here in life. So the thing that can transform, things that often change through trauma, if we allow ourselves to be open to the lessons and the growth and the opportunities that are there. Three main concepts. Number one is a new or maybe a changed self-image. So we can then start to see ourselves in different ways. If I've never really been tested, and this is very rare, of course, but if I've kind of just coasted through life and never really experienced too much, I've never lost anyone significant in my life. I don't really know what my capacity to deal with grief is like, right? I don't really know if I'm going to be able to cope when the important people in my life leave me, when I experience death, which is a very natural part of life. I don't know if I'm going to be able to deal with that. So my self-image doesn't really include that aspect of, for example, dealing with grief. When I lose someone very close to me and I go through the kind of world-changing experience of loss and pain and missing them and trying to figure out what my life looks like without them, trying to understand what it means, death and all of these kind of really, really transformative questions. I come out of that the other side changed, and not just in terms of, maybe finding some answers to those questions, but I come out of it changed because I understand myself in a different way. I know what I'm like when I go through grief. I know I know what it's like. And I kind of maybe think about relationships differently as well, which we'll get to, but I can think about life differently. I can think about the things that matter differently. And the other thing is kind of linked to that, which is when we go through very difficult experiences, our relationships are either enriched or they clarified. And the clarification can be the painful one. So if they're enriched, it means I went through I went through a really difficult time. My, 40 years in the desert, as it were, metaphorically, and there were people in my life who really showed up for me. When I picked up the phone and phoned the person who I thought would be there, they answered and they were supportive and they just showed. I mean, they weren't perfect, they couldn't take it away, but they were there for me, and that just felt like I wasn't completely alone in the suffering. That enriches that relationship, right? It says to me that people that are there for me, and this person or these people specifically, can trust them to be there. That enriches a relationship. It adds another layer of meaning to the relationship, depth to the relationship, trust to the relationship. So that relationship gets enriched through the trauma and through leaning on people in traumatic times. And what trauma often does is it disconnects us. It disconnects us from meaning, disconnects us from the people around us. When we're able to find connections and meaning in those traumatic moments, that's really part of the healing and recovery process. So it allows us to enrich those relationships. But as I said, it can also clarify relationships, which is often the painful part, which is clarity means sometimes we learn things about relationships that we didn't know. So maybe these people are not able to be there for me in this way. Maybe that's loss in its own way. Maybe that's painful in its own way. Recognizing that people that I thought would be there are not there. And maybe, the people surprise us. The people that we didn't really think would be there, they show up in a massive way. And then the other people kind of disappear. This happens a lot when we're going through difficult times. There's clarity that comes from relationships. And that doesn't mean, when we notice maybe people weren't there as much, that they're, necessarily dead to us and, they've let us down and we never want anything to do with them. But it just provides some clarity about what that relationship is and what it isn't. And then you kind of maybe have a bit more of a sense of where that person or people belong in your life. So the final one is priorities. And this is kind of self-explanatory, right? When everything is going well in life, in those rare moments when we're kind of not too stressed and not experiencing any crises, and it feels like things are okay. And if you pay attention, you'll notice those moments happen, or those periods happen, but we don't really notice them because they're not acute, right? So when we're suffering, we are obviously more incentivized to pay attention to suffering. When we're not suffering, we don't really notice it. We just kind of worried about the next time that we're going to suffer. So when things are smooth, then we kind of coast a bit and maybe just getting home and putting on the TV, or not really thinking too much about our lives, thinking about what's important to us. We just cruise a bit. Whereas when we go through really difficult times, that then really focuses our attention on what's important right now. When we've come out of a really difficult experience, whether it's grief, trauma, just hardship, or some challenge that we've been in, it reminds us what's important in life. And often those things are people that are important, or kind of being present, and the choices that we make, right? So all of those priorities can shift as well. So when you put all of these things together, you get this overall sketch of growth that can happen as we go through trauma. So there's a lot of science behind resilience, again, because it's such a sought after concept. I think we've focused a lot on it in terms of the research in psychology and neuroscience as well. So we understand that it's not just about psychological factors, resilience. It's also about how our bodies respond to stress physiologically, and a huge amount of our stress response is a physiological response. It's embodied. We feel it in our body. It's a biological response. And being able to kind of increase our resilience levels allows our physiological response also to be regulated. And so we develop stress management through the process of resilience. And you see this with hormonal changes as well. So people that have more competencies that are kind of correlated with resilience, they tend to show less stress hormones such as cortisol, adrenaline, epinephrine, and their bodies are more able to kind of go through a stress response cycle, which is they experience stress, they experience the physiological arousal of it, but then they're able to down-regulate again and get back into that state of recovery. And as a result, they tend to have overall better physical health. So people who are going through a lot of stress with low resilience tend to have very negative physical health outcomes, long-term health outcomes that are negative, cardiovascular disease, immune diseases, stress-related illnesses. Whereas people who are going through a lot of stress, which of course is a part of life, and have higher resilience, tend to have less compromised physical health because they're kind of managing that stress in a way that's not doing long term, not putting their bodies in long term risk for these stress related illnesses. And then resilient individuals also have more of a variety of coping mechanisms that they can reach to. It's not just one, but they have different types of ways of coping with stress. They probably are able to lean on things like good sleep, good diet, good exercise. They're able to kind of use relaxation techniques, and all of this contributes to overall well-being. So it's important then to ask, well, how do we go about building resilience? If you understand, maybe you can kind of have a sense of your resilience, and you can rate it 1 to 10. You can say maybe I'm about a 6. I'm not completely overwhelmed by life, but I also feel like sometimes life is too big for me, and I'm struggling to cope with it. What then? What do I do? This then brings us to the idea of resilience training. And in order to go about increasing our resilience, we have to understand, where does resilience come from? And specifically, where does our level of resilience come from? How do we kind of orient ourselves towards hardship? How do we position ourselves towards the difficulties in our life? Where do we learn these things? Where do we learn the ways that we think about strength? Or where did we learn to kind of shame ourselves when we feel painful feelings when we're going through difficult times? And often we will recognize that the narratives and the beliefs that we have about ourselves and our capacity to cope with life come from very early on in our lives. They come from experiences, and they come from lessons that we've learned, and they've come from key relationships as well. So we don't control these things that we go through, right? You didn't choose your environment that you grew up in. You didn't choose your genes. You're just you kind of just put in that situation, and then you have to find a way of responding to it. But these things shape us, right? So if you learn, and often it's about emotional regulation. This is a big part of resilience, is also being able to regulate feelings. And this is why when we start to get led astray by the idea of strength, we often become emotionally dysregulated, because we focus so much on not feeling. That's what strength is, right? To be stoic and kind of unmoved and unfeeling when everyone else is crying, that we become emotionally dysregulated. So we're feeling all these feelings. I'm feeling so disappointed with life. I'm feeling so angry at this person, but I don't really know what to do with these feelings. And we often learn that through our early experiences. We learn it through the way that our emotions are parented and our emotions are responded to. What were the dynamics like in your family when you were feeling sad, for example? Were you told just to kind of forget about it? Some people are struggling more. You shouldn't. There are people who have bigger problems. What that's doing is kind of, what it might be offering a bit of perspective, it's also just completely minimizing and invalidating those feelings. And so then we grow up and we learn that, well, my feelings don't really matter as much because there's someone who's hurting more. And so we become dysregulated. So we learn resilience, we learn emotional regulation, we learn our attitudes towards these things from our early experiences, which often are outside of our control. But despite this, there are things that we can do to further develop resilience. So we have to understand that when you are developing resilience, especially in children, for those of you who are parents, the answer is not to bubble wrap them so they don't experience any hardship or failure. But also the answer on the other end is not to, children need to be protected from too much adversity at the same time. So they need to feel that the world is overall safe and predictable, and adults are predictable and consistent. And that there is a kind of care and love that's there for them, that's unconditional. That's what children need, and then they can use that as a safe harbor for then kind of going out into the world a bit and experiencing some failure, feeling, developing their competencies through taking risks and through maybe taking on failure. This then can start to develop a sense of, okay, well, I don't have to be pathologically afraid of failure or incompetency or being found out, being seen, but I can kind of come back to the safe harbor and then kind of take a step out and take some risks and maybe fail a little bit and then come back and feel safe again. And this then develops a resilience over time. And we have to know the difference as we age between necessary suffering and unnecessary suffering. So unnecessary suffering is the suffering we're kind of inflicting upon ourselves, even unconsciously, unwillingly. And we often do this. And this is why people go to therapy and counseling, is to kind of understand, how am I adding to my suffering, as opposed to just the suffering that life is going to inevitably inflict upon us as well. And we have to experience failure, and we have to have a framework around failure that is actually quite compassionate towards ourselves, to say it's okay. You fail because you're a human being, and when you fail, you don't need beating up, you need taking care of. So take care of yourself when you are failing, and then go out there and take a risk again, because that's how you're going to overcome those fears. So we're running out of time a bit, but there's a lot to be said on mental toughness. This is a completely different kind of tangent we could go down. This idea of how mental toughness is correlated with control, facing challenges. But I'm going to leave that one for another day, and just finish with this slide. Yeah. I'll open it up to any questions at that point. Different things, and we obviously have, for those of you who joined the first time, which is most of you, that we've covered this year, but these are things that we've been speaking of. It just means, how do we make sense of our lives? How do we make sense of the purpose and the meaning in our lives? These are really for kind of giving us some framework when we go. It's not just pointless. This is a kind of foundational adaptive emotional, get lost in our feelings, but also not to deny our feelings, but just to allow them to pass through us as they could do. We feel it, ignore it, you kind of understand it a bit, be curious, and the feeling will pass. And you can do the same thing again. So that's active emotional regulation. And then we start to emotional experience. And that can be really helpful when we go through different times. Because one thing with difficult time, difficult feelings, right? Able to really kind of be able to process those difficult feelings. And so there's backlog and there's dysregulation. Come out in different ways, such as anxiety, wellness, but resilience specifically. And then we can kind of reach to the positive psychological techniques. So this is understanding not just how to deal with hardship and suffering, but how to also maximize well-being. And these are mindfulness and self-compassion and gratitude that are very helpful to reach to during difficult times. Mindsets are so sorry about the connection. Thanks for bringing that to my attention. And then a big part of being a human is helpful connections as well. Helpful relationships, meaningful relationships, deep relationships. It doesn't have to be that we have 100 friends. It just has to be that there are certain people in our lives, whether it's just a handful or less than a handful, that we know are there for us, that we're connected with, that we can lean on. And then the pillars of good mental health are the basics: diets, good diets, making sure you're getting enough sleep, and exercise. Okay. So guys, I'm going to pause there just so there's some time for any questions or discussion. I'm going to open it up to the floor. I just want to say thank you again for your patience with the connection's been a bit faulty at times, and I know there's been a lot of background noise. It's been pretty disruptive for me. I hope it hasn't been too bad for you. It's needed all of my resilience to be able to kind of carry on with this whilst there's a lot of very kind of noise going on. And unfortunately, this is just something I'm having to deal with at this specific stage in the premises that I'm in. So yeah, thank you for your patience with that. Any questions? Now I'll ask you a minute. Thank you, Samir. Appreciate that. I'm glad it was understandable. Thank you, Nico. Appreciate that. Okay. Guys, I appreciate that feedback. Thank you. That's helpful to know, and helpful to know that you don't necessarily need any clarities on that. But also thank you to you. So yeah, we can leave it there. I just want to thank you all again once more. And for those of you who are joining Regent next year, a very warm welcome. Look forward to having you all join us in these webinars going forward as well, amongst all of the other things you'll be doing in Regent. I hope that we'll see you again in these webinars. We'll have one more for the year in December, and we'll continue with them next year. And in terms of the recording, and excuse me, I think it's going to be on the Regent employability page. I'm not sure how long it takes to be uploaded there. You might find that this one, because of the quality issues we have, this one doesn't get uploaded. But there will be a library there. If you want to look on the Regent employability page, there's a library there of past webinars that we've done as well on topics like this. So have a look at that. Yeah, thank you very much. And then if anyone wants to set up a counseling session for any registered Regent students, this is free. You're welcome to contact me as well. It's counseling@regent.ac.za. I've just put that in the chat as well, so you're welcome to reach out there. Or if you have any questions about this topic as well, feel free to to get in touch. Good, thank you, Lyman. Thank you as well. Appreciate that, guys. Thank you. Let's leave it there. Just want to say thanks for joining, and we'll see you all at the next one. Enjoy the rest of your Wednesdays.